They say the US is the world's #1 superpower. But what if that power exists only because of 10 countries? And if just one of them says, "I'm out," what would happen? Power doesn't come from weapons. It comes from connections, an oil alliance, a financial handshake, a semiconductor contract. All are holding the US inside a web it can't walk away from. But if the threads of that web begin to snap, what's left might just be a giant statue with feet of clay. 1. China. Competitor or dependency? They call China America's #1 rival, a comprehensive strategic threat, a long-term headache for the Pentagon. But here's the truth no one wants to face. That rival is also the one keeping America's economy breathing, every day, every hour, every product you're using. We're living in a global paradox, where two superpowers are battling for dominance yet clinging to each other like there's no oxygen. And if America loses China, no war, no missiles, just a quiet plug pulled from Beijing. The American superpower dream could start to crack from within. Made in China, an undeniable truth. You're watching this video on a phone, maybe an iPhone or Android, but almost certainly, at least 60% of its components come from China. You buy toys for your kids, kitchen appliances, solar panels for your roof, or even face masks during a pandemic. All packaged in factories from Guangdong, Shenzhen, or Hangzhou. According to the World Bank, China accounts for 28.7% of global manufacturing output, far more than the US, Japan, and Germany combined. If tomorrow China paused its export of electronic components, what would happen? iPhone assembly lines in the US and India grind to a halt. American EVs run short on batteries and sensors. Green energy projects, a national priority, are frozen due to a lack of photovoltaic modules. And then, you'll see a domino effect from Wall Street to every Walmart aisle, an 800 billion piece of paper. Few people know that China holds over $800 billion in US government bonds. And don't let that number fool you. This isn't just paperwork, it's political leverage. One small action, like China dumping US bonds, could cause the dollar to lose value, public debt interest rates to spike, global financial markets to plunge. That scenario isn't far off. In 2024, China quietly sold off more than $100 billion in US bonds, a cold but powerful message sent straight to Washington. Not just manufacturing. China is rewriting the rules. We often think of China as the world's factory, but that's an outdated view. In the past 5 years, China has led the world in facial recognition AI, controlled over 85% of the global rare earth supply, essential to every high-tech device, tested cross-border digital yuan, ECNY transactions with Russia, UAE, Thailand, and even Brazil. If China succeeds in de-dollarizing global trade, the US dollar will lose its dominance. America won't be able to print money endlessly to fund foreign wars, massive relief packages, or its chronic budget deficit. And the world will no longer follow financial laws written in New York or Washington. The rules will shift to Beijing, a bloodless changing of the guard. You can't disconnect from what you need to stay alive. We often hear the phrase decouple from China, as if America could simply pull out with enough willpower. But the harsh truth is, the US has no quick way out. Moving factories from China to Mexico, India, or Vietnam is too expensive, not just in money, but also time and infrastructure. The US semiconductor industry still relies on China's rare earths, where over 90% of mining, processing, and recycling takes place. American tech companies are still running large language model AIs on GPUs assembled in Chinese factories. Meanwhile, China is expanding its global influence through initiatives like the Belt and Road, BRICS Plus, and new development banks to replace the IMF, creating a new ecosystem the US cannot control. If China really stops exporting power chips, how will America adapt? If China joins hands with Saudi Arabia, agreeing to trade in yuan, how many other nations will follow? And if tomorrow China declares, we no longer play by US rules, who will rewrite the future? China is not just a partner, they're a rival, but also the backbone of the global supply chain that America is standing on. 2. Russia, a superpower that needs no one's permission. Americans may not like Putin, They may fear the sight of Russian tanks storming into Ukraine, but it would be a deadly mistake to see Russia as just a military aggressor. While Western media paints Russia as a brute giant, in reality, this nation is both a hub of hard and soft power that can cripple the global economy with a single well-timed political move. And if one day America loses Russia, no nuclear war needed, just a headshake, a handshake with China, Iran, or Saudi Arabia, then the entire geopolitical security structure of the U.S. could collapse like a row of dominoes: gas, oil, grains, strategic blows from the frozen land. Imagine waking up tomorrow and gas prices have tripled, not because America raised taxes, not because OPEC cut supply, but simply due to a statement from the Kremlin. Russia controls nearly 10% of the world's crude oil production, is the largest gas exporter to Europe, though reduced since the Ukraine war, is one of the top 3 grain exporters globally, alongside the US and Ukraine. The Ukraine war made one thing clear: when Russia tightens the gas valve, Europe shrinks, and America pays the price. The US had to tap into strategic oil reserves, send LNG support to allies, and the result was rising inflation at home. Russia doesn't need to invade America. They only need to hold stakes in what keeps the world running: fuel, food, and global security fears, nuclear arsenal, and cyberspace, a game with no second chance. Here's something no one jokes about. Russia has the world's largest nuclear arsenal, more than the US. And not just missiles. Russia has hypersonic weapons, capable of bypassing any existing defense system. It has Arctic bases, where America hasn't set foot. It has electronic warfare systems that even NATO respects. But the scariest weapon isn't nuclear, it's cyber warfare. Russia once hacked Ukraine's power grid, leaving entire cities in darkness. It once interfered with US elections, though Washington never officially acknowledged it. And today, it uses hacker networks to influence global finance, transport, and healthcare systems. If Russia were to unleash its full cyber attack capability, no Western nation would be immune. Russia, a cornerstone of the new order. Here's the part many overlook. Russia is quietly restructuring the global order by building BRICS Plus as a counterbalance to the G7, settling energy deals in local currencies with China, India, Iran, backing the idea of a common BRICS currency to gradually replace the dollar in international trade. And what else? Russia is one of the top uranium suppliers to the US, an almost absurd paradox. America runs hundreds of nuclear reactors with fuel from its #1 rival. Russia is forging military ties with China, Iran, North Korea, forming an axis that cannot be sanctioned. America needs Russia more than Russia needs America. People often think Russia needs the US to trade, to export, to keep its economy alive. But the harsh truth is, America needs Russia to balance China. America needs Russia to control global nuclear arms. America needs Russia to keep the energy market from leaning too heavily on Saudi Arabia. America needs Russia to maintain order in the UN Security Council, especially as China starts asserting itself. And most importantly, America needs Russia to not align with countries that are fed up with the US dollar. If one day Russia says, "We're pulling completely out of the Western financial system," it could trigger a global domino effect, prompting others to follow. Then America won't be able to print money so easily anymore. If tomorrow Russia announces that the BRICS common currency can be used for energy transactions, how many nations do you think will join in? If Russia stops supplying uranium to the US, what happens to hundreds of operating nuclear plants? And if Russia, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia officially sign a joint energy pact, can America still be the world's policeman? America is in a tight spot. It must sanction Russia to save face, while also begging Russia not to go too far to keep the world stable. Russia doesn't need America's permission, but if America refuses to admit it needs Russia, the price may be very high. 3. Saudi Arabia, the finger on the world's oil valve. One thing remains unchanged. America is still the largest oil consumer on Earth, and behind every truck, factory, and flight in the US is a nation deep in the desert, so wealthy it doesn't need to print money to survive. Saudi Arabia, a kingdom without democracy, without press freedom, doesn't make iPhones, but can shake America's economy with a single oil production cut. The question isn't, how strong is America? It's, what happens if Saudi Arabia decides to stop playing along? Saudi, the beating heart of the oil era. Saudi Arabia holds 17% of the world's proven oil reserves, is the unofficial leader of OPEC, the cartel that can adjust global oil prices with a turn of the valve. It can pump out 10 million barrels a day or cut to 7 million, and every move sends Wall Street spinning. Over the past decade, every time gas prices surged in the US, people blamed the government, big oil, Russia, but the one actually turning the oil tap is Riyadh, where a word from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman can shake markets. Again, it's not because the US lacks oil, but because it chooses not to drill at scale domestically, to protect the environment, preserve reserves, and maintain strategic alliances, petrodollar. The system America can't afford to lose. Since the 1970s, a quiet deal has existed. America provides weapons and military protection to Saudi Arabia. In return, Saudi sells oil only in US dollars. The world wants oil, must convert to USD. America gets to print unlimited money without fear of inflation. This is the foundation of American financial power. Not gold, not GDP, but oil priced in US dollars. But that reality is changing. In March 2023, Saudi for the first time accepted yuan payments for oil with China. Talks with Russia, India, UAE to trade without USD are accelerating. Partnerships with BRICS are positioning Saudi as a key player in a new order. Where the dollar is no longer king, the kingdom no longer needs America. In the past, Saudi needed the US to survive. Now they're building their own empire. NEOM, a $500 billion futuristic city, doesn't need Western tech, energy pacts with China and Russia, moving toward hydrogen and clean tech. Investing in their own weapons firms, media, AI, most importantly, Saudi is shedding its role as the West's gatekeeper in the Middle East. It's partnering with Iran, once a sworn enemy, mediating in Yemen talks, backing Syria reconstruction, and even inviting China as a diplomatic guarantor. America was once the only one they needed. Now America is just one of many options. Intelligence, the quiet weapon. Beyond oil, Saudi is a vital intelligence partner in the fight against Islamist extremism. They help the US locate ISIS members, Al-Qaeda leaders, even provide intel for high-level anti-terror operations if Saudi stops sharing intel. America goes blind in Yemen, Syria, Somalia. Anti-terror campaigns face delays. Western allies are left drifting through the information desert. If Saudi officially demands oil payments in yuan, how many countries will ditch the dollar? If Saudi signs a weapons deal with China, does America still have its right arm in the Middle East? And if NEOM becomes a self-sustaining tech finance hub, what does Saudi still need America for? No bombs, no war, just one nod from Riyadh. And the global financial system could tremble. America cannot afford to lose Saudi Arabia, not just because of oil, but because of something deeper. The belief that the world still needs the dollar to survive. If Saudi exits that game, the dollar won't be the world's dominant currency, just one option among many. 4. India, an uncommitted ally, an indispensable partner. No country both excites and worries the United States as much as India does. The world's largest democracy, the most populous nation on earth, a place producing millions of engineers, scientists, and software experts, many of whom work inside major American tech corporations, but also a country that refused to condemn Russia when the Ukraine war broke out, continued buying cheap oil from Moscow, and maintains vibrant trade with China. Despite military tensions on the border, India doesn't pick sides, it picks interests. And that's exactly why America cannot afford to lose them. America's digital workforce. India holds around 75% of the global market in software outsourcing and IT services. Corporations like Google, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle all operate major R&D centers in Bengaluru and Hyderabad. The CEOs of Google, Microsoft, Adobe, IBM, all of Indian origin. If you're using Gmail, Teams, Zoom, or OpenAI's AI, chances are part of that technology was written, maintained, or overseen by Indian engineers. And if tomorrow India imposes heavy export taxes on tech, tightens outsourcing, or mandates local data storage, America's tech foundation will tremble. Don't forget, India is building its own AI models, domestic chatbots, and a tech ecosystem that's growing stronger without America, ambition that won't fit into an alliance. India doesn't want to be a long-term ally like Japan, nor tightly committed like South Korea. It stays neutral, but highly ambitious. The ISRO space program is competing with SpaceX for low-cost satellite launches. The government is funding over $10 billion into domestic semiconductors to reduce reliance on the US and Taiwan, EV batteries, solar panels, and auto production, all part of the Make in India strategy to dominate its own supply chains. India doesn't want to be part of America's plan. It wants to be the center of its own strategic ally or a powerful pawn. The US expects India to counterbalance China in Asia, but it's not that simple. India has bought over $50 billion worth of Russian weapons, including S-400s, submarines, and hypersonic missiles. It hasn't sanctioned Russia. Instead, it bought cheap oil, then resold it to Europe for profit. It joined the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia, but still refuses binding security commitments. That's why the Pentagon can't label India a true ally. And if pushed too far, India might opt out entirely. To preserve its strategic autonomy, India doesn't need America to grow. As Americans once thought, a generation of Americans believed India needs US tech to develop. Wrong. India is now the world's largest vaccine exporter. Saving Africa during the pandemic, it developed the UPI digital payment system, faster, cheaper, and more widespread than any American equivalent. It's building its own satellite internet, AI chips, and ecosystems independent of Apple or Android. If the US loses India, it won't just lose a tech partner. It could lose its lead in global innovation. If India signs a strategic pact with China and Russia, how will America respond in Asia? If India forces US tech firms to store all data locally, what happens to privacy and cybersecurity? And if India succeeds in building its own semiconductor ecosystem, could the US be pushed out of the tech race? India is not a third country. It's trying to become the third axis between China and the US, East and West, old and new. America can't impose on India, can't buy it off, and can't ignore it. Because if India takes its own path, without even opposing America, just by not cooperating, the entire tech and geopolitical alliance America depends on in Asia could lose its most crucial pillar. 5. Germany, the quiet giant that doesn't need to roar. Germany doesn't launch wars. It doesn't try to be a superpower. But don't let that silence fool you. When Germany shifts, Europe shakes. And when Europe shakes, America must change course. If China is the world's factory, Germany is the chief engineer. If the US is the world's military center, Germany is the industrial and intellectual core of the Western world. America cannot afford to lose Germany, not just for geography or military bases, but because Germany is the regulator of Europe's energy, technology, and political balance. German industry, the backbone of Europe. Germany is the largest economy in the EU and the fourth largest in the world. A top global exporter of machinery, automobiles, medical equipment, and industrial chemicals, brands like Siemens, Bosch, Mercedes, BMW, SAP, are the backbone of the global industrial supply chain. When global supply chains broke during COVID-19, America realized many made-in-America products were really assembled in America, with parts from Germany. If Germany cuts its supply chains or pivots entirely to China, the US won't be able to replace them quickly. A leader in green energy and digital policy. Unlike America, which still debates climate change, Germany has taken decisive steps. It shut down all nuclear power plants, invested hundreds of billions of euros into renewables, wind, solar, green hydrogen, pushed for AI standards, data protection laws, and smart manufacturing, Industry 4.0. Whoever sets the standards controls the market. And if Germany sets its own standards for AI, chips, and security, US companies will have to comply or be locked out of the $16 trillion EU market, America's military pillar in Europe. Don't forget, Germany hosts the Ramstein Air Base, America's hub for coordinating military operations and supply lines in Europe versus Russia, the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Africa, where the U.S. lacks permanent bases. If Germany demands U.S. troop withdrawals or limits activity, America's rapid deployment capability across Eurasia would take a serious hit, financial and political. Germany drives the EU. The euro is the second largest reserve currency in the world, and Germany holds the wheel behind it. Berlin has the biggest voice in the European Central Bank, ECB, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and EU fiscal policy. If Germany shifts its financial policies closer to China or goes neutral on Russia, America loses a reliable G7 ally to counterbalance Asia. And remember, decisions to sanction or not to sanction globally often begin in Berlin, not Washington. America needs Germany to keep Europe from drifting away. During the Cold War, Europe depended on America, but now, if Germany turns away, the entire EU could pivot. France may follow Germany, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, all see Germany as the engine. An entire European bloc could follow Germany toward de-Americanization in tech, energy, and defense. If that happens, America won't just lose an ally, it'll lose its ability to shape Europe's future. For the first time since World War II, if Germany asks the U.S. to withdraw from Ramstein, what alternative strategy can America deploy? If Germany forces U.S. firms to comply with new data laws, who loses market share first? And if Germany signs a bilateral trade deal with China, bypassing the U.S., will Washington still have a seat at the table? Germany doesn't need threats, doesn't need to shout, they just need to shift policy. And when Germany, that soft-spoken giant, decides not to walk with America anymore, the U.S. might lose its last anchor keeping Europe within Western influence. 6. Japan, the silent fire-tested force. If there's one country that gives America both comfort and quiet anxiety, it's Japan, a nation smaller than California, once fully defeated by the U.S. in World War II, now stands as an essential part of every strategic calculation Washington makes in Asia. Japan doesn't need to flaunt power, because it is power. It doesn't fire missiles, but holds the keys to the global tech industry. And if America were to lose Japan, not by war, but through a simple shift in independent policy, the entire U.S. security tech finance axis in the Asia-Pacific would have to be rebuilt from scratch. Beyond cherry blossoms, Japan holds the tech future. Japan controls over 30% of the global market for semiconductor materials, like ultra-pure silicon, photoresists, and specialized chemicals. It's home to Sony, Toshiba, Panasonic, Nikon, and especially Tokyo Electron, a leading chip equipment manufacturer. Without Japan, there are no cameras, OLED TVs, image sensors, or even AI. When Japan restricted exports of fluorinated polyamides and hydrogen fluoride to South Korea in 2019, the entire Asian tech supply chain wobbled. Now imagine, what if Japan did the same to the US? Chip giants like Intel, Nvidia would face quality issues, AI models would face disruptions, America's entire tech leadership ambitions forced to pause, 54,000 U.S. troops and a massive shield. The U.S. maintains nearly 54,000 troops in Japan, more than in any other overseas location. Bases in Okinawa, Yokosuka, and Misawa aren't just defensive, they're launch pads for interventions in Taiwan, the South China Sea, North Korea, even China itself. If Japan limits U.S. operations or requests a troop withdrawal, America loses its final shield in the Western Pacific. What makes this relationship unique? Japan owns no nuclear weapons, but defends the U.S. by hosting missile defense systems and early warning radars. Without Japan, America is blind on one side of Asia. Japan doesn't want to be a permanent ally. Many think Japan is a loyal ally, but the truth is, Japan is doubling its defense budget to 2% of GDP, its highest since WW2. It's developing 6th-generation fighter jets, hypersonic missiles, and its own air defense systems. It aspires to be a normal power, no longer fully relying on the U.S. for protection. And one more thing, Japan doesn't want to be dragged into every American war. It doesn't want to join if Taiwan erupts. It's hesitant to escalate tensions with China. It refuses to be bound by political calculations with no direct benefit. Japan is crafting a future without America. Japan isn't just preserving the old order, It's creating a new one through massive investment in AI, robotics, biotech, aiming to outpace the US in several future sectors, leading in standardizing green tech, hydrogen batteries, nuclear recycling, molecular solar energy, building its own alliances with India, Australia, and Europe, reducing dependency on Washington. And don't forget, Japan's younger generation is losing faith in America, witnessing internal unrest, gun violence, and unilateral foreign policy. If Japan restricts US military presence, how will America defend Taiwan? If Japan shifts entirely to AI tech not reliant on the West, who leads the tech race? And if Japan builds alliances without America, will Washington still sit at the center of the global order? Japan doesn't need nuclear weapons to command respect, it only needs silence, and to keep producing what the world cannot replace. America cannot afford to lose Japan, not just for military reasons, but for a deeper truth. Japan is the glue binding technology, security, culture, and Western values in Asia. Losing Japan doesn't mean losing an ally. It means losing half the world. 7. South Korea, a small ally with outsized influence. When people talk about global power, few mention South Korea first, a nation a third the size of Vietnam, with fewer than 52 million people, and located right next to an unpredictable neighbor like North Korea. But don't let size fool you. If any country can shake the global industrial system with a single production notice, it's South Korea. If there's a nation that's simultaneously a critical military strategy, tech artery, and global soft power engine, the US cannot afford to lose anyone but Korea. Memory chips, the silent weapon. The world relies on just two South Korean companies, Samsung and SK Hynix, control over 60% of the global memory chip market. Memory chips aren't luxury items. They're inside phones, computers, EVs, smart weapons, AI servers, and cloud data. Every server running large language models, every Amazon, Google, Microsoft data center, all run on chips from Seoul. If Samsung and SK Hynix stop supplying, or even delay for a few weeks, Silicon Valley goes dark, AI freezes, EVs stall. America is investing tens of billions into domestic semiconductors. But even Intel still can't match Korea's high-quality memory chips. 28,000 troops and a front line near North Korea. The US stations over 28,000 troops in South Korea, alongside radars, missiles, and aircraft carriers in surrounding seas. It's not just about deterring North Korea. This is a strategic choke point if conflict arises with China or Taiwan. Seoul is also a military buffer zone between Japan and the Asian mainland, something the Pentagon can't replicate. If South Korea demands US withdrawal, the entire Northeast Asia defense posture could unravel. K-wave, soft power. Outshining America's image, BTS, Blackpink, K-dramas, K-beauty, K-fashion. It's no coincidence that South Korea is now the most culturally influential country after the US in the 21st century. While America struggles with division, gun violence, and image crises, the global youth is learning Korean, wearing Korean styles, crying over Korean shows. Soft power doesn't kill, but it can win a generation's loyalty without politics. If Korea uses its cultural influence to build its own order, or a new alliance, will the US still be the dream for Gen Z? South Korea wants out of America's shadow. Inside Korea, a quiet but powerful wave is growing. Calls for nuclear weapons, to stop relying on US deterrence, massive investment in drones, smart weapons, and local military satellites, building its own chip supply chain, avoiding getting caught between the US and China. South Korea isn't anti-American, but it doesn't want to be a dependent shadow anymore. And if Washington forces Seoul to pick a side, Korea might choose no side at all. If South Korea asks the US to withdraw for peace talks with North Korea, what will Washington do? If China pressures Korea to stop exporting chips to the US, who will Seoul side with? And if Korea's younger generation chooses ASEAN, EU, Africa over America, does that shift the world's soft power balance? South Korea doesn't need to be a military superpower to keep America on edge. It only needs to stop exporting chips, or stop airing K-dramas, and the current world order begins to wobble. The US cannot afford to lose South Korea, not just for tech or military reasons, but because this is one of the few nations still holding on to global trust in a world losing direction. If Korea walks away, America doesn't just lose an ally, it loses a symbol of the future. 8. Brazil. The lung, the minerals, and the lever of the southern hemisphere. You might think of Brazil as a land of festivals, football, and rainforests. But here's the truth. If Brazil turns its back on the US, it's not just the Amazon that would burn. The entire ecosystem of trade, environmental policy, and America's political influence in the southern hemisphere would start to suffocate. And more importantly, this is no longer fiction. It's a scenario getting closer by the day. The lungs of the planet. But who controls the breathing? The Amazon accounts for roughly 50% of the world's tropical forest area, 60% of which lies within Brazil. The Amazon produces 20% of the planet's oxygen and absorbs billions of tons of CO2 every year, serving as a natural shield against climate change. If Brazil loses control of the Amazon, or deliberately maximizes its exploitation, the global climate effort collapses. That means the US must spend hundreds of billions to offset carbon. The International Climate Alliance falls apart. Rivals, China, Russia, India, will exploit the green gap to push alternative environmental models without US leadership. In other words, Brazil doesn't need nukes. It only needs to stop protecting the forest, and the entire world pays the price. The industrial supplier of the global South, Brazil, isn't just forests. It is the #1 global exporter of soybeans, beef, coffee, sugar, top 5 in the world. For crude oil, uranium, iron, manganese, rare earths. A holder of vast reserves of strategic metals used in batteries, EVs, phones, and weapons. The US, China, the EU. Everyone needs Brazil. But if Brazil chooses to prioritize China or enforces strict environmental restrictions, America loses its fallback supply chain. You think rare earths only come from China? Wrong, Brazil is the #1 alternative, and if it doesn't shake hands with the US, the West's semiconductor and green tech supply chain breaks. The geopolitical stage. Brazil wants to flip the table. Brazil is a core BRICS member, but its role isn't just about being present. It's the economic engine of Latin America, influencing nearly 20 neighboring countries. It's leading the move to de-dollarize, especially in oil, agriculture, and development finance. President Lula openly supports creating a BRICS common currency, calling the USD a tool of financial colonization. If Brazil starts using yuan or BRICS coin to trade crops and minerals, America loses economic control over the southern hemisphere. Brazil doesn't need to fight America to hurt it. Brazil doesn't need to declare war. It only needs to not cooperate. It doesn't sign climate deals on American terms. It refuses to join Western military alliances. It avoids borrowing from US-backed institutions like the IMF, World Bank, preferring BRICS Bank, Chinese banks, or Arab investment funds. And most importantly, it inspires other developing nations to do the same. If Brazil steps out of the US orbit, it's not just one nation, it's a whole continent asking, do we really need the dollar to survive? If Brazil asks China to pay entirely in yuan, how many Latin American nations will follow? If the Amazon becomes highly commercialized, who replaces America in global environmental leadership? And if Brazil allies with Russia, China, Iran on minerals, what role does the US have left in the southern hemisphere? Brazil is not loud, but if it rises, Latin America and the dream of American financial dominance may slip away. No guns, no chips, no war, just a quiet withdrawal of support. And in a world losing faith in a unipolar order, a neutral, independent leading Brazil may be the most beautiful nightmare America ever created. 9. United Kingdom, America's quiet corner of power. When you think of the UK, you may picture afternoon tea, Buckingham Palace, and politicians speaking with polished accents. But behind that elegance lies a strategic truth. The UK is America's silent right hand. If China is the rival, Russia is the threat, then the UK is the companion. From trenches to trade floors, intelligence to culture. And if one day the UK steps back, no war needed, just a change in tone, America will feel the chill of a multipolar world without a trusted co-leader. Five Eyes, America's second set of eyes. Five Eyes is the tightest intelligence sharing alliance on Earth. US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Among them, the UK is the top partner. Every day, the UK sends thousands of intelligence packets on terrorism, cyber warfare, and military threats to the US. The GCHQ network operates side by side with the NSA, collecting global data, intercepting signals, monitoring digital activity. Lose that intel connection, and America loses real-time eyes on Europe, Africa, the Middle East. They'll be flying blind. London, the global financial pump. London is the world's second-largest financial center after New York, and the main bridge between Asia and the US. Tens of trillions of dollars in assets, derivatives, and financial instruments flow through London for flexible regulation and tax advantages. If the UK steps out of America's financial orbit, Wall Street loses a critical clearing partner. The US dollar loses a global transaction hub. Major investment funds may start reallocating into yuan, euros, or pounds, not exclusively USD. No punch needed, just a quiet retreat from the City of London, and the US financial system misses a beat, the closest military ally. The UK is the only nation allowed to jointly operate nuclear submarine weapons with the US. No one else shares that right. The two nations share positioning systems, radar, military satellites, and regularly deploy together in NATO, the Middle East, and the Pacific. The UK has bases in nearly 20 countries, most aligned with joint US missions. If the UK lowers its commitment, the US doesn't just lose a partner, it loses the ability to globalize force projection rapidly. Diplomacy, culture, legal power, the unreplaceable levers. In the UN, NATO, G7, WTO, Britain's voice often paves the way for American strategies. In international law, the Anglo-American legal model is the global standard. In culture, Hollywood and the BBC, CNN and Sky News form a media ecosystem shaping global perception. If the UK pivots, not against the US, but towards strategic independence or Eurasian engagement, China, India, the Arab world, the world begins to question America-led order. Post-Brexit, the UK wants to play its own game. After Brexit, the UK is no longer part of Europe, but it also refuses to be America's shadow. It has signed trade deals with Japan, Australia, Singapore, without US involvement. It joined the CPTPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the US left. It's expanding investments in Africa and the Middle East, where US influence is declining. The UK is building a role as a neutral, flexible, global connector. And in that model, the US no longer holds the leash. If the UK stops sharing full intelligence with the US, who monitors threats across Europe? If the City of London prioritizes euros or yuan, is the global USD system still stable? And if the UK's next generation of leaders chooses neutrality between the US and China, who becomes the lead voice in the West? America may have many allies, but only one friend from war to peace, from trenches to summits. And that's the United Kingdom. The US cannot afford to lose the UK, not for muscle, but because without Britain, America may lose the image of being the righteous side, with the world standing beside us. 10. Turkey, the pawn that became a queen on NATO's chessboard. Turkey isn't an economic superpower. It doesn't lead in tech. It's not the center of global media. But ask any Pentagon general or European diplomat. If the US loses Turkey, it falls into a strategic void that can't be filled. Turkey is NATO. It's the Middle East. It's the bridge between Asia and Europe. It's the gateway to the Black Sea. It's the only country in the world that can talk to every opposing side. And the most dangerous thing? They know it. Geography is a weapon, and Turkey is a strategic pillar. Turkey controls the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, connecting the Black Sea, Russia, Ukraine, to the Mediterranean. It's the crossroads of Asia, Europe, the Middle East, where a military base can reach 3 continents within hours. It's a NATO member that borders Iran, Iraq, and Syria, 3 of America's oldest flashpoints. If Turkey blocks the straits, the US can't sail into the Black Sea. If Turkey quits NATO, the alliance loses its backdoor to Asia. And if the US can't trust Turkey, its entire strategy to control the Middle East, contain Russia, and access the Caucasus becomes useless. Incirlik Air Base, an irreplaceable stronghold. The Incirlik Air Base in southern Turkey is the hub for U.S. logistics, supply, and rapid deployment in the Middle East. From there, the U.S. can strike Syria, supply Iraq, surveil Iran, and monitor Russia in the Black Sea. It's also believed to house more than 50 U.S. tactical nuclear warheads as part of NATO deterrence. If Turkey demands a U.S. withdrawal, America loses its fast response edge in the entire region. More than that, it loses a symbol of trust within NATO, a NATO member with an independent soul. Turkey doesn't act like a loyal ally. It bought Russian S-400 air defense systems, despite U.S. warnings, refused to sanction Russia during the Ukraine war, joined talks with Iran, Syria, and even Hamas, groups listed by the U.S. as hostile. This is why Washington relies on but fears Turkey, because Ankara will shake hands with anyone. If it benefits them, Erdogan doesn't see America as a master. He sees it as one of many powers to balance. Turkey is shaping itself into an independent global axis. In recent years, Turkey has done what no one dared. Developed a modern defense industry, Bayraktar drones, domestic artillery, indigenous missiles, sold weapons to both Ukraine and Ukraine's adversaries, built influence across Africa, the Balkans, Central Asia, regions where America has faded. They want to be a third geopolitical force, between the US and China, between Russia and NATO, between Islam and the West. And if successful, Turkey will be the first country to escape America's shadow without fighting it. If Turkey blocks all NATO operations from its territory, where will the US deploy from? If Turkey exits NATO and joins a military alliance with Russia, China, Iran, what happens to the global balance? And if Turkey leads an independent Islamic bloc, modern but softly anti-West, what role will the US still have in the Middle East? A nation not too rich, not too powerful, but smart enough to stand between all power poles and force each side to make concessions. Turkey started as the pawn, but move by move, it reached the end of the board and became the queen. America cannot afford to lose Turkey, not because of brute strength, but because without it, the US loses grip over the world's geopolitical center, the place that determines who rules next. America isn't being defeated, it's being left behind. The world once revolved around America, not because it was the strongest, but because many nations chose to stand with it. But what happens when those nations no longer believe America is the friend they thought it was? We've talked about China, where everything you use is made, about Russia, who can spin the world off axis with a twist of the gas valve, about Saudi Arabia, who decides what you pay to fill your tank, about India, Germany, Japan, Korea, all reshaping how the world operates, about Brazil, the lungs and minerals of our survival, about the UK, the oldest friend who might choose a different path, and about Turkey, the pawn that might flip the board. The danger isn't war, it's silence. As country by country walks away from America, no headlines, no declarations, just no longer standing beside them, in a multipolar world that's forming. How strong America is doesn't matter as much as how many still want it to be strong. If this video opened your eyes, open someone else's, share it with someone who still thinks America is invincible. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep seeing the world through a lens not manipulated by mainstream media, and comment below. Which country do you think would shock the world the most if it walked away from America? We want to hear your voice. Because this is no longer just about diplomacy, war, or economics. This is about you and the future you're living in.